What is your involvement in the movement? What do you do?
I have been an organizer on different levels. I've served as a Pride organizer since 1991 as a volunteer. I am the outgoing president of Rhode Island Pride. I'm the past president of the Rhode Island Alliance for Lesbian Gay Civil Rights. So I've been doing quite a bit of work on various issues and different ways of community connection.
What are some milestones that happened in Rhode Island?
It's been very incremental. From my perspective in the Pride movement, I was a young boy when the first Pride took place in 1976 as part of the bicentennial celebration. I was interested in watching tall ships, while other groups were trying to organize and be visible. The city of Providence, as well as the bicentennial group, actually denied this group to be able to gather, to be able to march. They sued and won. And so that was part of certain milestones. I think it took 11 years until 1995 for a comprehensive civil rights bill to protect gays and lesbians and bisexuals from discrimination in housing, employment, credit, and public accommodations. And a few years later after that, Rhode Island is one of the first states to protect transgendered individuals. So gender identity was also brought in as a protected class here. The fight for marriage equality took a little bit longer. The first bill, I believe, was introduced in 1997 by then an openly gay state rep by the name of Michael Pisatore. And it was stimulated by a lot of conversation taking place in Hawaii, where their Supreme Court had decided that it was illegal to deny individuals the right to be able to be married. However, because of politics and because of cultural shifts, what ended up happening was they changed the Constitution. And so there was great talk about Hawaii being the first state to secure marriage. Actually, only recently has that movement been able to move toward fruition. So it took some time. We incrementally dealt with passing bills to protect. One was called the Hospital Visitation Bill, because some of the benefits of individuals to be able to be married is that you can be able to have anyone come in to your hospital. If you're not identified as family, the hospital can say no. If someone dies and your partner is not married, you can be denied the right to be able to do final arrangements for that person. So a bill was passed for funeral planning and small little incremental steps, but it was never really marriage. And in fact, prior to the passage of marriage this year was passed. And again, it gave some of the responsibilities and rights of marriage, but wasn't complete until this year. And it was very significant because for the first time we actually had a governor in his inauguration say that marriage equality was one of the top priorities of his term. And it came to be with the help of another very important individual who came out at a rally at the State House one year, which is our Speaker of the House, Gordon Fox. And so by all these small little things, it helps to be able to erode away a lot of the misperceptions of gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender individuals. The laws are just tools. They don't get rid of prejudice. It's but it allows individuals now some way to protect themselves from that prejudice. It still, it doesn't erase bigotry, it doesn't erase sexism and all the other isms that are cousins to homophobia. So it's really part of how a community grows. It gives people the opportunity to be able to use these tools. I often say now is that we've been given the tools and the seeds, now we have to build and plant to make a life. For Rhode Islanders, this has been a really significant thing because something as simple as if I were to die, my house and my property would not, in many of the states in the United States, I could not be able to automatically have it pass on to my next of kin, which is their married partner. Now we can do that. Now Social Security benefits would be, and it's simple for some people because it's been there all the time, but for many gay couples, when they're older and they can't take care of themselves and they rely on that, for any heterosexual couple, if a partner dies, those benefits automatically go to that one. For gay and lesbian individuals and bisexuals, that has not been the case. So those are the type of, I call it, they're big, but they're foundational. It applies to everyone. It's the same. There's nothing special about them. That was the fight for years. They were saying these are special rights. These are the rights that every single individual should be afforded.
What is something that happened nationally that affected the gay community
In Rhode Island?
Yeah.
Nationally. At first I would have said that it sort of has gone in like ebbs and waves. We saw the ebb at one point in the early 90s concerning civil rights protections. Rhode Island was the 9th state in the country to protect individuals from discrimination. And then afterward, and a lot of it, if you look at it and measure it against what's happening in the political landscape, a lot of things sort of just went, no. It wasn't really good or bad, they just sort of just stayed the same. And I think part of the momentum that took place nationally as well as regionally in New England was the marriage equality movement, because we began to see states surrounding us, starting the number one state being Massachusetts, and then going from there to having states like Vermont, then Connecticut, and so at one point, Rhode Island was surrounded by marriage equality states. And you could see the momentum nationally taking place when you have Iowa, in the middle of, that's middle America, through a judicial process, make it legal for LGBT individuals to be married. You could see there was pressure when the president, was saying, I'm struggling, and then he eventually said he came out in support. It's like, okay, you can see momentum, and you'll hear that momentum, but it goes in ebbs and tides. So as much as we're seeing this momentum, we can also see a natural backlash that will take place in other states where they're going to do their part to make it as difficult for an individual to get married as possible. Along with all the other isms, they're going to make sure that certain people aren't going to be able to vote, and they're going to make sure women are not going to have access to certain medical resources. And that's all part of that political landscape that's all connected.
What are some changes that happened in the gay community?
I think here in Rhode Island is a unique place in the fact that because of our size, only 39 cities and towns, you drive an hour each way and you're out of the, and I think we surprisingly served as a great example for the rest of the nation about how to get things done in a legislative way. Even our opposition, there is a very vocal former state senator from Newport by the name of Dave Carlin, who one day approached me and said, you all should teach others how to do this because you all have done it right. And part of was recognizing that here in Rhode Island, we know one another. You're related to someone within 2 degrees. That's your cousin, your teacher, and I think that was the way that we began to influence public policy as well as develop a sense of connection. It's not perfect, I'll be very honest. It could be a lot better, community-wise. However, we've been able to see things such as, like in the work that I've done with Pride. When I first started, Pride was a very small event with a couple of hundred people. We used to meet at the State House, and it was nice. It was not what we see today as being one of the largest downtown events in Providence. Where at one point the thought of having a sponsor was a joke. Where now we're working with individuals and businesses, both nationally and locally, who want to be a part of this growing community that they recognize should be served just like everyone else. And so I think part of the thing that we're seeing change and things that we sort of can be commended is that by being out, being visible, we're seeing changes in places, everything from schools, like here at the Met, where we have openly gay individuals working without fear of losing their jobs as it was in the past, and in fact celebrating our youth and being able to participate as they have done in Pride. You know, marching in Pride is a really great thing. So I think those are the types of changes that we're seeing that is very helpful for making change as a community.
Now, I heard that you interviewed people from Stonewall. Could you tell us about those?
I've talked with a number of the Stonewall veterans, and to hear some of their stories is very similar to some of the stories of what we refer to here in Rhode Island, the 76ers, because it took such a level of courage to be able to stand up to what you knew was going to be obvious opposition. It wasn't something that was a surprise that they were going to that they had been raided repeatedly. It wasn't a surprise that they were discriminated against. The surprise was that they fought back. And for years and years, people who have been oppressed conditionally, mentally, can get to a point where hit number 50 doesn't really differentiate from hit number 51. You get numb to it. And it takes something to really jolt you to say, enough. This is not the way it's going to be. And so that Stonewall uprising, when you talk to a lot of the individuals there, they weren't, as I said, you know, individuals like Rosa Parks they were ordinary people that did an extraordinary thing. They weren't prepping for this. This wasn't something, they just did it because it was part of the passion. They really felt that it was time to stand up for what was right. Appreciate these freedoms in Eastern Europe, where in Belarus and places in Africa, where just identifying yourself as such means you become a target, and in many cases, violence ensues because of it. So when you get to really hear their stories, which there's some that you know I've heard over the years, they really are impressed by the fact that they're just like you and I. They're not supermen and women. History has made them in such a way because of the fact of their courage. But you know, when you really get to talk with them and sit down with them, hear their stories, just like ordinary people, they just got tired of being treated lesser than, and stood up for themselves. and kick-started something that was far bigger than their wildest imaginations. There had been groups that had been around. There had been organized groups for years, but it was really the time where, in fact, when they first started, it was entitled the Gay Liberation Movement. Because they wanted liberty, they wanted freedom, they wanted to be able to be who they were, and they didn't know what was ahead, and they had quite a few obstacles that could have derailed them. In 1983, when you start seeing when the United States, the CDC recognized AIDS, this could have completely derailed that movement, because at the time it was a disease which was primarily identified with the gay community. And so it could have stopped the progress, and it didn't. And that's pretty amazing because of how devastating this disease was.
Why do you think it didn't do that?
I think because they recognized it. Believe it or not, it allowed, because of this disease, they really had to learn to come together. It was sort of forced because of these circumstances that, as a community, they really needed to come together, to manage their resources, to find their allies, and in some ways, I hate to say it, but because of that, it gave an additional fuel to the movement. Instead of actually pushing them back, it actually gave them more, because now you began to identify how easily people would discriminate against anyone who was different. Because as we saw, the face of HIV and AIDS was just not gay individuals. We had young men like Ryan White. He was a young heterosexual boy who had HIV and AIDS, and how the world treated him. And so we began to then recognize that this movement involves other people, that we have to build coalitions, we have to reach out to faith communities, we have to talk about the race issue as much as we didn't want to, because again, there are things that are connected. And and there was some resistance even within the civil rights movement. Black individuals like, this is not a civil rights movement, this is not a civil rights issue. But then you had individuals like Julian Bond from the NAACP and Coretta Scott King, Martin Luther's wife, say this is an important part of the movement of civil rights. So all these factors really helped in being able to get everyone together to deal with this enemy, which we just celebrated, just yesterday, on Sunday, another World AIDS Day. It's been 26 years now, 27 years. But there's still that determination that you can't be defeated, you can't give up.
When Don't Ask, Don't Tell was eliminated, what freedoms were granted to people in the gay community and the effect it had on them?
Well, I think there was a couple of things that, of course, the direct benefits to those who were serving, where they no longer had to hide. It takes a lot of energy to hide all the time. So just having that taken away from them allowed them to do their job better. As a nation, we became a safer nation because of getting rid of that policy. Other nations had done it. Israel, Spain, all these other countries had, got rid of this, and we were one of the last holding on to it because of fear. And so the other thing that it allowed, it once again fueled the conversation about who is your neighbor. Because now this group, for years, we used the expression that people stayed in the closet, and why that expression is so appropriate is that it's easy to ignore things that are hidden. When you don't see them, they're not relevant to you. So by putting individuals out there, them taking the risk, and remember, there were lots of individuals that came out knowing that they would be dishonorably discharged. But they knew that the only way this movement was going to happen was that sacrifice of honesty. And so that whole power of coming out and trying to influence public policy based on that it was so powerful that that helped to likewise so important. There's no add water instant solution in any of these circumstances. It takes time. It takes education. People have to learn about what they're afraid of, and usually when they do, history shows that we benefit ourselves because we learn that this is not a really actual thing to fear, and so that in itself helped the part of that movement in dealing with how we identify the person, that the person is important no matter who they are, and that they're doing their job, we should be supporting them. So what happened with Don't Ask, Don't Tell and how the Congress dealt with that is going to help another piece of legislation that before them, that's ENDA, which is dealing with the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. And you have to understand, they'll be thinking, if it was okay for gays and lesbians to do their job.
What do you think is the future outcome for gay rights in America?
Believe it or not, for as much as people are saying, places like the Bible Belt and the Midwest are going to hold on to this, if you look at just data, that's going to change no matter what. The electorate that is that opposes it is getting older, and the group that supports it are becoming more and more numerous and are voting. So as a result, they're going to change what we know about public policy just by elections. So you're going to be seeing more conversations about that. Yes, we still have discussions from individuals on that radically oppose that, but their voices are becoming more and more muted by everyday Americans who are just saying this is not important to us. Even here, when you start talking about the marriage equality movement, the majority of Americans do not oppose marriage equality. And that's because at one point, I think about it, 15 years ago, when we're talking about this, we wouldn't even bring it up. Now we're seeing that changes, and part of that is how, whether the individual be gay or lesbian or not, by people coming out and showing their support and not being afraid to show that support, is definitely showing how powerful an influence is going to be. So we're going to see that conversation. We're going to see laws changing in surprising places that you probably would not believe, just because of it. It's going to take time, but just it's going to happen.
What was the process, and what were the challenges of trying to get gay marriage legalized in America?
A couple of things, and I can break it down. Apathy within our own community. After a while, when you fight and you fight and you fight and you fight, you don't go anywhere. That can definitely be an issue. Realistically, one of the biggest oppositions was the organized effort from the Catholic Church. It was very apparent the bishop was in strong opposition to that, as well as the influence of outside groups, the groups that came in specifically targeting marriage equality movements, and because of that, resources became a challenge because we don't have that type of money, and when they bring in these groups, it became a challenge to be able to compete with them. But we're able to once again recognize who are your friends, who are your allies, and start making those coalitions and starting small. The marriage equality movement, marriage equality, Rhode Island started off as a small ad hoc group of people meeting in the church hall of Beneficent Church one day. And that's how we basically began this whole marriage equality movement in conjunction with groups like GLAAD in Boston, Gay and Lesbian Advocates and Defenders, and a woman that there's some amazing articles on you should look up, and she's sort of like the architect of marriage equality movement, and she works in Boston, lives in Maine, by the name of Mary Bonato. Yeah, there was just recently an article on her. She's an amazing. She scares me, and she's only like 5 feet tall. But her power and her mind, the way she thinks, is just absolutely amazing. And she was pivotal in being able to move Rhode Island forward in this fight. I only have a few minutes to have to run for this phone call before so.
I think, just to conclude, can you sort of make the linkages from Stonewall to marriage equality as to sort of what were the legal gains that brought marriage equality? AIDS.
Yeah, I think when I think of Stonewall, I think the key word that pops to head is visibility. All of a sudden, both in the media and as a community within ourselves, we became visible. And that was really important to be able to influence public policy, to influence to organize and to inspire a community to begin to act. And that was as I said, that started the engine, and started to get people recognizing that they could organize themselves. And when the AIDS epidemic hit, I think that second thing that we needed to really come together and recognize the strength that two are better than one. That if we got together, we can be able to still make changes to protect ourselves, because now it's our lives. And it was our lives before, but it was literally our lives at this point. So the fight became real. And as we went through the 80s, we began to experience what we started to see, at least our conversations, our community were becoming part of the conversation. Don't Ask, Don't Tell was, something that, though it took place in the 90s, we hadn't had that type of conversation. It was just bad. It was AIDS and an occasional movie that would come out, and we were still the caricatures of society that you could still make fun of us, and universally everyone would laugh and go, that's real funny. A level of dignity and respect was really coming to the forefront because of the fact that people were putting their lives out in the open, even if they were dying, like Rock Hudson and others who had HIV. All of a sudden, these icons that people grew up with were being identified as either gay or lesbian, or bisexual, transgender. So that started to add the fuel that dignity is crucial in being able to understand and motivate people to see that we have just as much value. Our families are just as important. And putting that face to that. And so incrementally, as we started to then work on civil rights legislation, it became, of course, people were saying, of course they should be protected and have a job and a place to live. What is a job and a place to live? It's supporting a family. So now we're beginning to the building blocks of creating the image that we are not different than. So we began to show the similarities. And by then working on these civil rights legislations, people began to say, they got to know us. Once you get to know someone, once you get to see their face and you know their names, it's amazing what happens when the misconceptions start falling down. And that's how that movement began. And then what ends up happening is that families had to honestly talk about it. Look what's happening right now in the Cheney family. Okay, you have one sister who's lesbian and married, one who's running for Senate who's against it, and though there is tension, they still have to talk about marriage and love, because that's the key thing about this entire movement. It's all based on love and who we love, and the right to be able to do that without fear.